Well, good afternoon, and welcome to our December webinar from the BBR webinar series, where we'll talk about Nebraska's producer service industry. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm the director of the Bureau of Business Research and also a faculty member here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'll be presenting along with Anna Mai and Madeline Splichal, who are two undergraduate students here at the university and are also Bureau of Business Research scholars. So we're the authors of the report, and we'll be presenting this webinar over the next 20 minutes or so. Before we get started, I would remind you that we have a chat window associated with this webinar. There's some information about the report there, and you also can utilize the chat window to ask a question of me or Anna or Madeline that we would answer at the end of the webinar. You also can just chat with other webinar participants if you like. So thank you so much for joining our webinar today, and we're looking forward to letting you know what we've found in our research about Nebraska's producer services industry. Here's an outline of what we'll talk about. We'll define producer services. We'll talk about some of the characteristics of the industry, and then naturally see how Nebraska is doing, comparing Nebraska with the United States and some other areas around the United States. Now, first of all, what are producer services? These are businesses that are primarily engaged in providing services to other businesses. So an example would be a firm that provides accounting services. Sure, they'd have a few household customers or people as customers, but many of their customers and their largest customers would be other businesses. So it's a service, it's exportable in the sense that they could have clients located over a large geography, not just locally, and it's primarily serving other businesses. Here's some examples of some of the industries in the producer services industries, and as you look at these businesses, obviously there's a lot of, knowledge-intensive occupations here. So engineering and architectural services, legal services, the information technology and all industry and all that entails, advertising, management consultants, specialized design services, scientific research and development. And this is just to name a few of the components of the producer services industry. Employment is growing rapidly in these industries. As the economy, obviously there's constant pressure to get the economy to be more efficient. And one of the ways businesses do that is by having these key services provided out by an outsourced provider rather than having staff within the business or as many staff within the business. And so turning to producer services firms can be a more efficient way to conduct business. Also, if you looked at the list, I can go back, of producer services industries. Some of these things like information technology, research, management, a larger share of the production in the economy is occurring in these areas. So that's the other reason that producer services are growing, just because those sorts of knowledge-based services are a larger share of the dollars spent by all sorts of businesses as they produce goods and services. So at this point, I would like to let Anna provide you with some additional information about this sector.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. And I will talk about some characteristics of the industry. For education, the industry employs many college graduates, often in STEM fields such as engineers, accountants, software developers, marketing specialists, and management consultants. Within the industrial coding system, many of producer services industries are concentrated in Industry 54, professional, scientific, and technical services. That is a lot to say. So we will come back with Dr. Thompson to learn more about PSTS.
Thank you, Anna. Just a few more facts about the industry. Anna emphasized that the occupations in the PSTS industry are very knowledge intensive and high wage occupations. And we've got some more specific data on that here in this slide. So this is national data. And you can see what a high wage industry PSTS is around the country. So the average weekly wages, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, for all jobs or all non-farm jobs is nearly $1,400 a week, which is a pretty good wage. If you think about a full-time job over 50 weeks, that adds up to a significant amount of money. But note that the average PSTS job is the weekly wages are 67% higher than that around the United States, or over $2,300 a week. So most PSTS industry type jobs, you saw the list of jobs and occupations and industries, most of them are full-time work, full-time, full-year work. So that weekly wage of over $2,000 implies a job that would pay over $100,000 a year on average in these industries. Just as a point of comparison, let's look at the manufacturing industry. That's obviously an above average wage industry as well. But you can see even manufacturing, the average wages are only 14% higher than the overall non-farm jobs. So this really emphasizes the types of high wage employment that are being generated in the PSTS sector. Employment is also growing rapidly. So over the last decade, we've had a decent decade in terms of job growth, 12.3% or around 1.2% a year in terms of employment growth in the United States. PSTS jobs have grown 2.5 times faster, nearly 30%, 29.1%. They would be growing maybe 2.5 to 2.75% annually. So and you see manufacturing actually has dropped a little bit. Its growth is a little bit slower than employment overall. So I guess the bottom line is it's a rapidly growing industry in terms of job growth and also a very high paying industry in terms of job growth. So this is clearly, for the states around the country, the PSTS industry is a potential opportunity to benefit a state economy. Here's a little bit more information about the national trends. You can see with that rapid employment growth between 2014 and 2023, PSTS has become a larger share of employment. So this high wage industry is now nearly 7% of all U.S. employment. And that percentage has risen almost 1% over the last decade. Contrast that with manufacturing. I showed you a little earlier that manufacturing growth has occurred over the last decade, but it hasn't been as fast as job growth overall. And manufacturing employment has actually fell down to 8.3% of all U.S. employment. What a difference that is from, say, 30, 40 years ago. So I think the other interesting thing here is how much the gap between the share of employment has fallen between the PSTS industry and manufacturing. Even a decade ago, it was nearly a 3% gap, but now it's down to only 1.4%. And PSTS is becoming as big an engine for the economy as manufacturing. In fact, I think an interesting kind of intellectual exercise is in what year will PSTS become a larger share of employment than manufacturing? If trends continue, that could happen in the next decade. I think another important point about the PSTS industry, the information technology, consulting services, accounting, engineering, all the things listed before, is a critical role they've played in the metropolitan economies of the United States. Of course, we've heard over the years about how some of the Midwest and Northeast cities, Philadelphia, Chicago being examples, have really struggled with population growth and perhaps seen a lot of loss of manufacturing employment during that period. But if you visit those cities, you also see there's still quite a bit of prosperity there. And I think a big explanation for that contrast might be the PSTS sector. I think growth, all the high-wage job growth in that sector, it's concentrated in some of these cities like Philadelphia and Chicago, and that's allowed those cities to stay wealthy despite some of their struggles with manufacturing. I think fast growth in the PSTS sector, or the data bears this out, is also part of the reason that some of the rapid growth cities like Austin and Raleigh have succeeded, and how some of our more affluent cities, Boston and San Francisco being examples, have stayed affluent in the modern economy. Okay, so again, talking about the industry globally, we're going to focus on Nebraska here in a minute. PSTS is the high-wage, high-job growth sector of the U.S. economy. It's a key to urban success and one key to attracting and retaining college graduates, given the types of occupations and high-wage occupations that are so common in this industry. Well, at this point, I'm going to ask Madeline to provide you with some information about how Nebraska is doing with the PSTS industry.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. So as he mentioned, we're now going to, kind of narrow it down to what's going on here in Nebraska. We're going to do this by looking at a few different factors. So the first thing that we're looking at here is the share of employment. So as previously mentioned, the share of employment has grown pretty significantly for the PSTS industry in the United States as a whole by nearly 1%. From 2014 to 2023. However, in Nebraska, it's only grown by about 0.5%. So while still growing and still increasing, it's not growing at nearly the same rate that it's growing as a whole countrywide. And then moving on to job growth altogether. So in the United States, the PSTS has grown about almost 30% in the last decade. And in Nebraska, it's grown almost 17%. So again, still growing pretty significantly, but again, not at the same rate that it's growing in the country as a whole together. And then moving on to the weekly wages. So again, as previously mentioned, it's about 67% above average for PSTS weekly wages compared to all general non-farm jobs in the country. And in Nebraska, it's only about 46%. So again, significantly higher than the average weekly wage that we see here in Nebraska, but not to the same extent that we see in other areas of the country. So Nebraska may not be capturing the highest wage segments there. And then here's another little graph, and this just shows a breakdown of some of the different major careers in the PSTS industry. So you can see here there's the computer systems design and related services, architectural and engineering services, accounting and bookkeeping services, and then all of the other careers captured in the PSTS industry. And you can see here in the breakdown, the top graph shows the percentage of each of those groups in the United States as a whole. And then beneath that is the percentage of all those groups in Nebraska. So you can see for computer systems design and related services, as well as accounting and bookkeeping, we're actually pretty close to reaching the same share that we see countrywide. However, where we lose a lot of the shares here are the architectural and engineering services, and then all those other smaller services captured in the PSTS industry. Okay, and then I'll hand it back to Dr. Thompson to wrap up the presentation.
Well, thank you, Madeline. Here's a little bit more information about how the PSTS industry is doing in in Nebraska, and particularly its largest metropolitan area of Omaha, making a few key comparisons with Omaha as well. So you see the U.S. and Nebraska data are repeated there. We also see the Omaha employment for data for the share of non-farm employment in the PSTS sector in Omaha, both in 2014 and 2023. You'll see, as might be expected, there's a larger share of employment in the Omaha metropolitan area in this sector than in Nebraska as a whole. There is a tendency for PSTS employment to concentrate in the largest metropolitan areas. But you'll notice that looking at 2023, the share in Omaha is somewhat less than it is in Des Moines, and significantly less than it is in Chicago and the very successful Austin, Texas. And so not an increase. There was not an increase in the share of employment in the PSTS sector in Omaha over the last decade. So, anyone who knows the Omaha economy knows there's a lot of great businesses in the producer services, the PSTS industry in Omaha. There's been growth in those businesses. However, it hasn't been growing faster than the economy overall as it has in so many other places. So it kind of raises a question about what could we do to do even better in this important, fast-growing, and high-wage industry. But you know what? There's more to Nebraska than just Omaha. So we're going to look at some of the other metropolitan areas and see how the industry's been doing, as well as some of our micropolitan areas. So here's the Omaha comparison in a little bit more detail. You can see that Omaha is about a percent and a half below the average for the share of employment in PSTS, below the average that you'd see in peer metropolitan areas. Let's look at Lincoln in this regard. Lincoln is a little closer to its peers, slightly below, but you don't see as big a differentiation as we saw with Omaha. Also, the Grand Island metropolitan area, our third metropolitan area, you can see it's also fairly similar to the average of its peers, a little bit below Laramie, but above Dubuque and Grand Forks. So Lincoln and Grand Island, less of the industry than you find in Omaha, but compared to peers, doing a little bit better. It's also nice to look at some of our micropolitan counties of the state. So Dawson County, where Lexington, Nebraska is, Dodge County, where Fremont, Nebraska, Platte County, where Columbus is, and so forth. And you can see, as would be expected, generally speaking, the PSTS industry is a smaller share of employment in these micropolitan, the larger places in non-metropolitan Nebraska. But there's a few exceptions. You can see Buffalo County, it's about 3.5% of employment. That's where Kearney is. And then also Scottsbluff, approaching 3% of employment. So kind of an interesting trend here is as you move west, PSTS seems to be more concentrated in our micropolitan places. I would say that that's perhaps related to the proximity to other cities. So in central Nebraska, along with Grand Island and Hastings, Kearney is kind of the primary place, and so you'd expect legal services, accounting services, information technology businesses to kind of concentrate in Kearney or those other cities. Similarly, in Scottsbluff, that's the main micropolitan, that's the main place in the panhandle of Nebraska, and so you'd expect these services to concentrate there as well. Now, when you get to the eastern part of the state, like Dodge County, where Fremont is, it faces a lot of competition from Omaha, and these jobs tend to be in the Omaha or Douglas County area rather than over in Fremont and Dodge County. Okay, so looking at the big picture, this is a growing industry, a lot of high-wage employment. Nebraska is not doing quite as well as a number of other parts of the country in this particular industry. And probably something we need to track and keep an eye on because as the data is showing, there's certainly a lot of opportunities here for high-wage employment, kind of employment that keeps young people in a state potentially. These are certainly types of jobs a lot of college graduates are looking for. So what might be done? And sometimes the policies that are helpful to this sector are a little bit different than what might be most helpful for manufacturing, agriculture, insurance, or some of Nebraska's other key industries, logistics I should have mentioned. So one thing that can be quite important is lower tax rates for entrepreneurs, as well as upper middle class workers. The working class in the PSTS sector tends to be upper middle class professionals. So we have to make sure as we're doing tax reform and trying to lower those tax rates to really focus on the income tax rates that apply to these types of workers. Certainly with information technology, some of the other industries and occupations in PSTS, we need to make sure that a decent share of our students are preparing for these careers if we want the industry to grow faster in our state. And this largely involves encouraging more students to study and succeed in STEM fields. And I purposely put "and succeed" in there because a lot of students aspire and start in STEM fields, but don't end up finishing up because of the challenging nature of those majors. And we need to make sure that we're providing the tutors and other services, mentors, to help people succeed if they have the desire to train for a STEM field. The people who are graduating, it's important to keep them or to attract out-of-state students in STEM fields. So our in-state internship programs need to also focus on PSTS firms, and the opportunities are there. Encourage more of those firms to take interns and help support them in those efforts could really pay off for the growth of the industry in our state. And obviously, upper middle class people, entrepreneurs, have more to spend than the typical family, and quality of life and things to do with that money can be very important for them. And so we need to make sure as a state that we're continuing our ongoing efforts to enhance the quality of life. So I think all these things are happening. Perhaps pick up the pace and do a little bit more in these areas. And if we could capture that 29% job growth and capture that 67% higher wages, I think it would be a really big plus for our state's economy. So I want to thank Anna and Madeline for their key work in developing this report, and appreciated the chance to talk to you about it today. We'd like to answer any questions you have at this time. So not seeing any questions at this time, we're going to go ahead and sign off. I guess this is the last webinar of the fall semester, but we look forward to seeing you in the spring semester with additional webinars. If you'd like to track the Bureau of Business Research, there's a variety of ways to do that on social media. We also have an e-newsletter that we send out every month. And if you'd like to be subscribing to that, please send us an email at bbr@unl.edu. Again, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you in 2025.